So I met DJ Schleen last year when he came out to talk at DevSecOps last year. And, I couldn't be more proud of somebody who's been driving such an amazing amount of change at Aetna. DJ last year told us a little bit about his journey. And then I got to see him again at another conference after that, and another conference after that. And what was really interesting about his journey is last year, I think he was a little bit terrified. And I think it came across. And then over the course of the last year, to really watch him go through what Aetna's been doing has been really remarkable. As he's been telling the story more and more, some of the new things that have come up, the things that they're doing, he's had a lot more confidence over this last year. And I hope today that you're going to learn a lot from him, because I've truly been inspired by him in learning from him over the course of this last year. His story is very similar to some of the journey that I've personally encountered, and I think that it's been really awesome to find a friend in this industry that we both share a lot of the common similarities in driving change throughout our organizations. So without anything else, DJ, come on down.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Well, hey everyone, I'm DJ Schleen, and yeah, I'm not going to stand behind that this year. So my slide deck is called Release the Monkeys, and it's basically a story of summary of what we did last year and how things have changed over the past year and a half or year and a quarter or so since DevSecOps Connect or DevOps Connect last year. And a little bit about what we can do in our pipelines and how we can automate security controls. A lot about culture, and then I'm going to finish off with where do we go from there? Once we have all of these reference architectures, how can we extend these kind of ideas out? So again, Aetna, I'm part of the SSG, which is our software security group under Mark Willis right here, so no pressure having my boss here to take a look at me. So lots changed over there. So we can actually use the term DevSecOps and not have people look at us really confused. Last year, I was talking to a gentleman in the expo, and he said, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm a DevSecOps evangelist." He's like, "That's not even a word. It's DevOps, right?" And I like doing little things where I register domains for DevSecOps and DevOps, and the DevOps is just a redirect. So we're starting to use these terms now more so in the industry. At Aetna, we spent a lot of last year tinkering with pipelines, getting really technical and figuring out how we as security organizations could actually have these conversations with developers and really understand the technologies and the products, tools, techniques that they were using to implement software in their supply chain. And based on that, we've really started to almost permeate into the environment where we become more rugged, and we're basically taking that bottom-up culture that DevOps and DevSecOps brings, and combined with some executive buy-in that we have now, this is great. We're actually seeing how large organizations and this cultural revolution sort of meet in the middle and start implementing everywhere. We have a large DevOps initiative that has been renamed DevSecOps, so I was really happy to see the decks come out and start talking about that. But at the end of the day, we have a long way to go. So last year I talked about defect density, right? And our defect density at Aetna is measured for one high vulnerability in 10,000 lines of code. So this was really cool, and then our CSO, Chief Security Officer, came out and said, "This is what you got to do this year." So that's a drastic reduction in the amount of high vulnerabilities that exist in our entire code base. And when we take how many applications that we're onboarding into our automated pipelines, we're looking at bringing on 1,700 applications this year into automation. And that's a huge undertaking for not just security, but everybody else who's involved in this process. In the past 3 months, for example, we've had started the year with 17 teams with 97 or so build pipelines going in an automated fashion. And just as of today, we have over 500 builds going in an automated fashion through our security pipelines. And we're probably around 97 or so teams that are participating in this whole idea. So the cultural revolution at Aetna is happening. Security is becoming part of everything that we do for every project. So I have a formula correction from last year. So I said that success is people and process and tools. And that equals success. And I took a little bit of a look at this, and I'm like, if you assign a weight of 2 to each one of these dots, that makes DevOps success equal 8, right? So I thought, well, if you add security into this, it's going to be a little bit more value. So we can take the formula of process times tools to the power of security, and then the exponent of people, and we're going to get 16. So that's, DevSecOps, we turn it up to 11, right? We make sure that we have a little bit more than we have from a normal pipeline perspective. So this is our Aetna values wheel. And the thing about this that I wanted to focus on before we get into a lot of the risk conversation is, we do what we do for our customers and our constituents. So this is what we wake up, make healthier lifestyles for people, and we do that through technology. So we're not here to do the coolest thing, or it's fun to do the coolest thing. It's fun to get all these automated tool sets in place, but at the end of the day, it's about our customers, right? And the innovation that we do, it also is really cool, and the excellence of what we do, we want to make sure that it's well executed and it's integrated, it's communicated to all of our teams. So with that, the cultural aspect of this is that our values basically set the standard and set the bar for our cultural integration of DevSecOps into our organization. So focusing on risk, right? What does risk mean? I was doing some research about this for another conference that we were at, and I focused a little bit on how we can use DevOps and DevSecOps to reduce some risk. And so these items here, the idea of integration, communication, all these kind of topics, when you start looking at these, and this is all sort of a definition of how to remediate enterprise risk. Really, it sounds a lot like DevOps and DevSecOps, right? So that's sort of a good thing. So we're on the right approach to take risk into account. And in global security, the organization we're in Aetna, we're a risk-based organization. So there's compliance, there's governance, all these things that we have to do. But at the end of the day, it's about security and about the risk associated with it. So if you take a look at 3 sort of pillars that we try to address inside of our programs, we want to automate all of our security tools. That's number 1. If we can automate these things, then we can take that information and disseminate it. And that means taking the appropriate KPIs and actually pumping them to the right people at the right time. And then we can do some really cool things where we actually investigate this data that we're collecting, and we can start analyzing trends in attacks. We can start correlating physical events to cyber events. Really, the opportunities are endless from this kind of approach. And all of this gives us efficiency, right? So as long as information is flowing and we have our tools automated, and we're collecting this, we can start making really good decisions. So automation, I call this the quadfecta. And I said to my wife that word, and she's like, she's in the audience somewhere. This is the first time she's seen me on stage. It's great. I'm not reading this time. And these 4 things are the quadfecta. And it's like the first 4 horses that come in a race. And if you do all 4 and get them in that order, you're sort of winning, right? So this is a great way to start your security programs. Start off with static code analysis. Put that in your pipeline, automate it. Dynamic analysis, open source software management. So knowing about the vulnerabilities that are in your open source components. And if you're running containers and you don't have container vulnerability scanning, you're missing the boat. Because I can tell you, we developed this internal application in global security, and our application had no vulnerabilities, which was great. But all of the layers that made up that container and that OS that this was running on were riddled with vulnerabilities. So we could address and remediate those and put a clean container out, which was really cool. So after that, we're looking at cloud configuration risk. So your infrastructure, what it's doing. And then some chaos as well, right? And we'll get into chaos. It's moving target defense. And that's something that we've been talking about quite a bit in the last year or so. dissemination and investigation. So for this, we're looking at like actionable KPIs, like getting the information to the right people and making sure that it's actually relevant to what they're trying to do. Every single thing that we collect, our ultimate end goal is to give this to our data science team. And our data science team applied security modeling and data modeling to that data. And the more data we give them, the more information that they give back to us. And with that, we can start iterating our program, improving the data collection. And that's a lot of volume of data. And we're just starting to send this over. So this is a work in progress for us, getting all of this data centralized and then figuring out exactly what it means and figuring out how we can action it. So faster cycle times. This is a little bit of a similar slide to what I showed last year. And the point of this, and I wanted to bring this up, it's still relevant today. Agile and DevOps, I don't think that they're necessarily, different from each other. You can do both at the same time, right? They're not a replacement for each other. Scaled Agile Framework 4.5 came out, and they actually brought in DevOps and talk about the whole DevOps idea inside of SAFe. The problem is they forgot security, and I reached out to them. I'm like, why did you leave out security? It's like a huge aspect of what we're trying to accomplish in the enterprise. So hopefully with the next version of Scaled Agile Framework, they add a little bit of security into the mix. But the point here is if you are doing things faster, right, getting things out to production quicker, from a security perspective, you're conditioning your development team and your operations team to be really, really agile. And if you can deploy to production 50 times before breakfast, and all of a sudden there's a vulnerability that happens 0 day, you could potentially remediate that and get it out and go on with your job. That's why my headshot is me riding a bike on Green Mountain in Denver, because I would rather be doing that than coming in and trying to fix something. So this is a sample pipeline here. Again, similar to what I displayed last year, but showing that from the time an idea comes out to the time it goes into production, we start adding in security tools. And once we get those quadfecta of tool sets implemented in our pipeline, then we can start concentrating on different things, like getting our ethical hackers and our penetration testers, getting that information gathered and collected from that and rolling those manual processes back into that automated pipeline. And all of this is really just application lifecycle management, right? So, ITIL, change management, all these things still apply. You do this in minutes to hours, and then all that information goes into one central location. Right? You want to be able to normalize the data that comes out of these tools. So, a high in one application might not be a high in another application. And a risk score could be completely different. And then your organization's risk tolerance for actually dealing with this vulnerability, completely different. So trying to get it into one place so you can really measure this information and then ship it off to your data guys and get them to go crazy with it and try to identify patterns and attackers or adversaries. So reducing risk with chaos. This is an interesting one. So one of the things that, from a security approach, when we start moving a lot of our organizations into a container environment orchestration engine, there's a great opportunity to reduce the size of the payloads and the applications that go out with them. So if you're looking at a virtual machine or a physical machine back in the day, huge machines, physical had to go up to it, insert disk 20 of 500 to try to get these things up, and they booted like, a snail. So trying to remediate something on that, moving target defense and sort of this chaos that you want to introduce, didn't really exist. Angry got mad, or a monkey got mad, right? Or angry, so that's cool. But the component of moving target defense is that you want to be unpredictable to the end user or to the attacker that's coming in and trying to get into your systems. So by taking that original virtual machine or that original physical machine, going down to a virtual machine, it's a lot smaller, it's still 4 gig or so. And then you come down to a container and you can start doing these applications like that are serving web apps in maybe a 100 meg container. Well, your attack surface is a lot smaller, so that's great from a security perspective. You have a manifest of all the libraries that are in there, which is great. You can use tools to actually see where your vulnerabilities are across your clusters, and then you can start cycling these things. So it's really interesting that it's almost like throwing grasshoppers into beehives. Which, like, don't do it. Like, don't go up and just do it because the bees will attack you. But, you know, the beehive is a normalized state until something hits it and attacks it. And then what they're going to want to do is defend the hive, neutralize it, and then after everything is said and done, they come back to normal, right? And there's this normal state. So if you know you're normal, you can react to the abnormal. And, you know, in a containerized environment, this could be bringing your hosts up and down. And when you do that, automatically patching things. Cycling your containers, because you can kill them, randomly kill the pods, expand out your infrastructure, and then contract it at the end. So if you're doing this in the cloud, one of the risks that is associated with this is a cost risk. As you start scaling things out, you're using more compute, more memory space, you're gonna end up paying a lot more money. So having it contract is a sort of a mitigation against this sort of spending. So as an example, you know, here we go. We can rebuild the application. We can automatically patch it. And here's a sort of an example of a diagram that shows this. So if we have an external attack that comes in and we identify it, we can instantly create a work item. You always want to track that work and then block that traffic at the IPS IDS level. And then the really cool thing is now a lot of these manufacturers of firewall technologies and, you know, infrastructure, they have things in the cloud like virtual appliances up in the cloud, but they all have really good APIs and alerting systems. So if you get an alert from your IPS IDS system that you have an attack, you can block that port, block that IP. You can take some sort of action on the firewall level, but then you can trigger an event back in your pipeline because you've already automated it. So if you've already automated all of that, you can rebuild your containers, patch them automatically, run them through your same testing, regression testing, et cetera, and deploy them out into the environment without having a human involved. So cycling, all these things can be automated once you have that pipeline defined and in place. And then you can reduce, you know, a little bit more risk by introducing the chaos monkey, right? This isn't necessarily the simian army. There's other tool sets that create polymorphic operating systems. So every time you reboot these OSs, they're completely different. And the memory addresses are shuffled. Things are completely unpredictable. So that libphp library that has a vulnerability in it, you won't be able to actually attack it or apply that vulnerability if you're scrambling binary OS. So doing things like that introduce a little bit of moving target defense. And again, take the information out of there, pump it to your data analysis, your data modeling, data science teams. We have a specific one at Aetna that just concentrates on security, and it does a pretty good job of it. So takeaways from this: nice monkeys get mad, right? So you know, treat your adversary and understand your adversary. Know your security story, right? Know your product. As you define your pipelines and you start putting these tool sets into place, the data that comes through that, action it, take it and disseminate it. You know, use it to your advantage and get executive buy-in. Show the value of adding security into the pipeline. That's going to get you a lot of people listening in the organization. I'll tell you a little story, and this is interesting. I was in Hartford at the head office about a week and a half ago, and I had a meeting with a couple of developers, and they wanted to talk about containers. So we were talking about this, and you know, I ended up going into a whole spiel of DevOps and DevSecOps and all this kind of stuff. And then we started getting deep into like Kubernetes and daemon sets and like all of these really cool things and how we did orchestration and automation. And they asked me what team I was on. And I said, global security. And they couldn't believe it. They're like, why are you on global security and you're talking like a developer? And they thought it was great. And it sort of hit me. It's like, that's culture, right? Is when you can communicate in the same terms and get passionate about the same things. And even if it's just sprinkling a little security into it, you know, the ability to have these conversations, I think what we did last year really helped us get to that point where we could have these conversations with developers and be on the same page. So, when we take a look at a bug or a defect or a vulnerability, I like just calling it work. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's a vulnerability, and it doesn't matter if it's a bug. All that is just a label. It's just a piece of work you have to do. So 3 final thoughts. Definitely, security is culture, right? It's the whole term DevSecOps. I remember talking to John Willis last year after DevOps Connect, and he's like, I don't like that term. And I told him, I'm like, I didn't like it either. Security just should be part of everything we do. But if you take security and you say Sec DevOps, that means security is leading the conversation. And we know that's never going to work. And if we put it at the end, then security is the same afterthought that it's always been. So if we put it in the middle, it sort of forms the glue between the 2 organizational units and those 2 teams. And then eventually, hopefully, it's just called development, and it's just normal. So 3 final thoughts on this is people are key. You got to invest in your people. Train them, talk to them. If you're an evangelist for DevOps in your organization, or DevSecOps, hopefully, go into your teams or the other teams. We have 6,500 or 65,000 employees at Aetna and over 7,000 developers. So going in and talking to them is the only way you're going to spread the message, right? And just have the conversations with them. Bring in folks to present, do little conferences, attack and educate forums. That's what we do. And, we tell people this is how this kind of attack vector works, or these are some security things that you have to think about when you're doing the programming in this language. And I think it's grown from 14 to, I don't know how many people now. I can't even count them on the call list anymore. But these things have been going on for years at Aetna. And as we bring up the education and security knowledge of our developers, it's making more secure code. Definitely integrate everything. Integrate teams. It's not just about technology, right? Integrate the security resources into your teams. We started doing this, years ago in an affiliate of Aetna that's based out of Denver, Colorado. They have a defect density of 0.0, period. There's no 0.006. They have no high vulnerabilities, and we scan them every time they do a check-in. So that's giving us at least a bit of risk assurance that we know that the software is good. We still do our ethical hacking. We still try to find out more information. We don't just hit the scan button and forget about it. So integrating your teams is great. Integrating your code is great. From a team perspective, we would go into these organizations and then feature teams, and we'd sit down as a security resource and talk about the features that they were planning for the next releases and just get a bit of a knowledge of what's happening, what's going on. And then keep moving. You're not going to solve everything in one day, and you definitely can't burn the ocean, right? Think about how you're going to roll out your security program across your pipelines. Think about where you're going to automate things, and make sure that it doesn't interfere with how developers push code out, because the business still needs to run. You don't need to put a blocker in place or an impediment, because that's just going to make people mad and they're just not going to listen. So make sure that the flow is going, reduce the waste in your organization, especially from a pipeline perspective, and keep moving. Taking a picture? Okay. Thank you.